One of the experiences I trust every homebrewer shares is the feeling of awe that comes from witnessing the conversion of wort into beer through the fermentation process. Even after 15 years, I still get giddy when I see the first signs of airlock activity, a nice fluffy kreuzen developing on top of my beer. The worst is when this takes too long. You all know the anxiety that comes from checking on a batch a day after pitching and seeing no action. This is why we love Imperial Yeast, who pack 200 billion cells of the purest yeast into each pitch-right pouch, which assures quick starts, healthy fermentation, and predictably great results. I strongly urge all of our listeners to check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and let them know that you appreciate their support of the Brewlosophy podcast while you're at it. All right, on to the show. A few years ago, a group of guys reached out letting me know they wanted to do something more with this little thing called the Brew Club, which at the time had been around for maybe a year but was not terribly active. They had this idea to get people more involved, which was especially important at the time considering the whole COVID pandemic where people were spending a lot more time at home and a lot less time going to in-person club meetings. Well, one of the dudes leading this up was a homebrewer from San Antonio, Texas named Will Lovell, who had a clear passion for brewing, which was evidenced by his early participation in what eventually became the Brew Club Experiment Series. After communicating with Will a whole bunch, it occurred to me he seemed to have the chops to do this whole Brewlosophy thing on a more official level, so I invited him to join the crew, and luckily for all of us, he accepted. Well, a couple months ago, Will was the guest for the monthly live Q&A session we offer to patrons of Brewlosophy. He hung out for over an hour answering questions and sharing some of his experiences. This week, we're going to be sharing that session with all of you, not only as a way for listeners to get to know Will a little bit better. He's a great guy. But to give you an idea of what you get for throwing just $3 a month our way. If you are unfamiliar with Patreon, it's a really neat platform that frankly allows us to keep bringing you this podcast every week. Those people who appreciate what we're doing enough to make a small monthly pledge are known as patrons. And in return for their support, we give them a little something extra as a way to say thanks. You can learn all about the various rewards we offer patrons over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that today, except for to say that our two most popular levels of support are the $3 tier, which gets you into these monthly live Q&A sessions with people in the brewing world, and our $5 tier that also gets you a discount at Yakima Valley Hops. Past Q&A guests have included folks like Russian River's Vinny Chilurzo, the Alchemist John Kimmich, and a bevy of homebrewing all-stars like John Palmer and Gordon Strong. Coming up later this month, I will be in the Q&A spotlight yet again, so if there's something you've been dying to know about yours truly, now is your opportunity to ask, and I tend to be a pretty open book. I'm going to be hanging out with patrons on Saturday, October 28th, 2023, so you just have to make your pledge by that Friday, the 27th. As for the Yakima Valley Hops discount, they're always worth at least $5, usually more than that. For example, this month's discount, patrons get 20% off of all fresh 2023 Australian hops, including heavy hitters like Galaxy and Vic Secret. That is a hell of a deal if you ask me. Again, if you're at all interested in learning more about becoming a patron of Brewlosophy, which we'd appreciate immensely, head over to patreon.com/Brewlosophy. If that doesn't float your boat, you can still help us out by using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support. We're affiliated with most of the places people buy brewing stuff online, including Amazon, More Beer, and Great Fermentations. When you use those links, which you can also bookmark for future use, we get a small commission on each purchase that helps us to cover production costs. Finally, if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts that allows you to leave reviews, we'd appreciate that as well. Thanks to everybody who's already left those rating and reviews. We appreciate you. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who are known for their incredible all-in-one electric brewing systems. I've brewed on both their 120 and 240 volt systems, and I'm telling you, these things are legit, efficient, easy to use with a relatively small footprint. You're not going to be disappointed with one of these units. Plus, the guys behind the company run an amazing YouTube channel, which you can find by searching YouTube for Clawhammer Supply. If you're in the market for electric brewing gear, make sure to check out what Clawhammer Supply has to offer at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to let them know Brewlosophy sent you when you're checking out. That's clawhammersupply.com. Listener Will wrote in with feedback on episode 232, where contributor Steve Thanos and I talked about our views on naming beer. This episode was one that yielded way more feedback than I ever expected. I mean, it's been over a year and a half since we dropped that episode, and people are still writing in about it. Will said, I loved this episode as I take particular pride in naming my beers. Like many things in life, the naming process morphed over time, but I've now settled on a naming process reflecting the name of my home brewery. To preface, I got bit by the brewing bug in 2004 when my dad and stepmom moved from Rumson, New Jersey to Newark, Delaware. However, missing living by the beach and not having a place to keep the Sea-Doos, first world problems, they bought a house in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Much to my delight, I discovered Dogfish Head while there, and I never looked back. In 2006, I was in a Walgreens and saw a Mr. Beer kit on sale, marked down to $7.49 from $75. My friend convinced me to buy it. The beer came out okay, but it piqued my interest enough to keep going. For many years, I played drums in various bands, but eventually started writing and recording my own music as I play multiple instruments. And when I was looking for a name for my project, I landed on 749, harkening back to the beer kit. Fast forward to 2019, I jumped into all grain brewing with both feet. My beer was getting to the point where I was really enjoying sharing it with friends and beer-oriented customers. I was a barber from 1997 to 2020. I started to name my beer and cider at first by using the style and then trying to create a pun based on that. But after realizing or being told these names could be perceived as offensive, which was not my intention, I decided to take a different approach altogether. Being that I'm a musician, primarily a metalhead, although I appreciate and like good music regardless of the style, I love Hanson. Shh, your secret is not safe with us, Will. I decided to use that as my catalyst for naming beer. And better yet, my husband's name is Metal Sky, or Metal Ski? I'm not sure how to pronounce that. And when you break it apart, you get Metal Sky. So my brewery got rebranded Metal Sky, and all the beer henceforth has been named after songs. Again, I try to name a beer based on a style. For instance, my German beers are named after songs by German bands. My Calcommons are named after songs from bands from the San Francisco Bay Area, and so forth. Although I have named beers after movie titles like The Pills Have Eyes. Movies are my third love after my husband and music. I've even gone as far as creating a logo, my own beer labels, stickers, magnets, shirts, and glasses. I am wicked ADHD, so I have a bazillion hobbies, and when I find something I enjoy, I jump in 1,000%, and beer is one of them. Naming beers just happens to be one of my favorite parts of the hobby, after drinking it, of course, and I'm just super stoked that other people are as passionate about the naming process as I am. My apologies for this being so long-winded. I traded cutting hair for writing in 2020, but just wanted to share my positive view on the subject. Thanks so much for making my day more enjoyable and keep on doing what you're doing. We will absolutely do that. Will, thank you so much for the feedback. We always enjoy hearing from you, and your whole approach to naming beers is one that I can sort of relate with. There was a period I went through a few years ago where the name for the beers that I brewed were inspired by small quotes from some of my favorite movies. Those quotes that I think most people don't really notice, but I found meaningful or funny or whatever it might be. Though, seeing as we publish all of the stuff that I brew, I tried to keep those names subtle enough that only the people who really knew the movie that I was referencing would get it. Anyways, I also happen to be a big music fan, and I write my own songs as well, but I don't believe I've ever used that as inspiration for a beer name. I may have to tap into those reserves at some point. Thanks so much for hitting us up, Will. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. So we dropped the first episode of the Brewlosophy Show on YouTube back in February of this year, just 8 short months ago. And since then, our videos have been viewed over 350,000 times, and we've gained nearly 18,000 subscribers. From what I hear, that's pretty good for a new YouTube channel. I'm not certain, but I'm no YouTube expert. To me, this is evidence of the awesome work host Martin Keene has been doing, and we're confident anyone listening to this podcast would also love the Brewlosophy Show. If you haven't checked it out yet, you should give it a shot. Just head over to youtube.com/@thebrewlosophy show. That's the @ symbol followed by the Brewlosophy Show with no umlaut. Alrighty, we'll be back with Will's live Q&A session with patrons of Brewlosophy right after this break. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com, and be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
Oh, okay, we got some viewers hopping on now. Yo, how is everyone doing today? Maybe I'll make a clicky noise like Marshall does with the, I don't know, I'm sure I've heard us talk about this before, but he has like a dog clicker, and so you'll hear this loud when it's time to like start and go into segments. It's a lot of fun. I see hello from Brunswick, Canada in the comments section. So welcome. Thanks for joining us today on the Patreon Q&A. For those of y'all who don't know me or seem you're in the wrong place, my name is Will Lovell. I'm a contributor with Philosophy.com. I've been brewing for a little over, I guess it's been 12 years now. It's been a while. It doesn't feel like it's been that long, but then it also feels like it's been forever. I'm sure some of y'all can relate to that. See, I see comments on the actual page itself. And then there's Jesse from BC, Canada. Hey, welcome, Jesse. Thanks for hopping on. I think there's a way to comment inside of the video where it shows up in this screen. So if y'all can kind of figure that out, that would be awesome. Because I think I have a little comment section over here that you got to go look at and scroll through. But yeah, so kind of my beer drinking story, as it were, kind of came along whenever, I guess, around the time I was in college. I'd had beer before, but I wouldn't say like the Natural Light and Miller Lite that I'd had was really something that like I enjoyed at the time. I do enjoy them now, but I couldn't say that I enjoyed them at that time. And I guess the thing in college, I guess I had my first Shiner Bock, and that was probably the first beer that I claimed that I actually enjoyed. To me, it's like Shiner makes a pretty good, international amber, international dark lager, whatever you want to call it. We call it Texas Bock beer here. But that was kind of what got me into beer, like in more of the craft side of beer. I'm not sure how craft Shiner seems today compared to some of the other stuff, but I will say that it was very kind of craft back then, at least in my mind, back in the, I guess 2000, 2, 3, 4, 5, somewhere in that range. And then and then I kind of slowly discovered English ales and Belgian style ales. There was a place called the Fox and Hound there at College Station where I went to school, and kind of like went down the rabbit holes of drinking a lot of those beers because they had $2 pint night, and so I could get $2 pints of just about anything I wanted. So that was pretty awesome. See, all the comments are showing up over here. So we did that, and then I guess my wife and I got married, and she was a veterinarian for the Army, and so we kind of moved to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, where it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. The beer scene was a bit scant. I could still get my two primaries, which was Miller Lite and Shiner Bock there, but I guess there were some craft options there, but not in the way that you see today. And then eventually we moved to even more remote Guantanamo Bay Naval Air Station, and that's kind of very much a dearth of not much imported beers to drink, which is kind of what I was used to. Apparently the Command Master Chief in Gitmo really liked Ice House, and so you could get Ice House pretty easily and readily, and it was pretty good. Fort Lost in the Woods. There you go, Kevin. That's it. Yeah. So this says, will you discuss or disclose your day job? Yeah, I work in IT. I'm just an IT systems engineer, systems admin kind of person. It's nothing that exciting. If you really want to talk IT, you can shoot me a message, Scott. I'm willing to talk IT with you, but it's not like I really want to discuss IT a ton outside of work, really. And then Havo says, hey, Will, great work with philosophy and TBC. So here's my question. Recently, when I went to my local homebrew shop to get an extra firm bucket, the guy said his beard got caught on the drill while he was drilling the holes, and that's why he took so long. Fortunately, I didn't rip it off, and we had a good laugh about it. So I was wondering if you had any experience when something similar happened. Also, what kind of maintenance does your beard require? So I don't know that I've had any brewing related beer accidents, and I'll get back to Fort Lost in the Wood things, or not Fort Lost in the Wood, but Gitmo things later in a minute. But I don't know that I've had any brewing related beard accidents necessarily. Probably the worst thing that's ever happened with the beard is my daughter got like a drone from the grandparents, and it was one of those drones that you don't have like a controller, because my daughter's was I think 7 at the time, and so like she wasn't like really big into controlling a drone with a controller, so she would like use her hands to control it. And what was weird was that it got popped around and eventually got stuck in my beard, and I had to and we were on a cruise ship at the time because we were cruising when my daughter got this. And oh, hey, look, now the comments are showing up over on the right hand side. Cool. We were on a cruise ship at the time, and it was pretty hilarious because I had like this big chunk of my beard kind of missing, and I didn't really have all my scissors and everything that I would use to shape my beard, and so it looked really funny for a few days while I was on the cruise ship. Thankfully, I'm not going to see many of those people again, but that was pretty bad. I've had some smoker grill related accidents where it kind of singed a little bit, so that one not so ideal necessarily, and then. But nothing brew related. I'm sure beard hair has gotten into something somewhere, as that would want to be. But I should probably dip my beard in Star Sand, give it a Star Sand bath, right? Just a little wet Star Sand beard. That way, if any beard hairs get in there. But no, nothing too long with the beard. Definitely more mechanical issues. As far as maintenance, it may not show up very well on this particular podcast, but I did do a little bit of a trim around the edges, just to kind of get a little more shape. I haven't shaved in, when was my daughter born? 2014. I'm not even sure. It's probably years before then that I was clean shaven. I've had some kind of facial hair for almost as long as my wife and I have been married. And that's been quite a while now. I think that's 15, coming on 16 years, maybe. I'll have to do some math on that because we got married in 2008. Yeah, carry it. Yeah. So probably since my wife and I have been married, I've had at least a goatee or some form of beard, but I stopped using like beard trimmers in about 2014 when my daughter was born. And I still use scissors and stuff to kind of clean it up. And then there's a local company here that makes beard balm. Ironically, I found out about them at a gun show. Is there a more Texas thing than to find a local beard balm from a gun show? I'm not sure. But I tried it and my hair didn't fall out, and I kind of liked the way it smelled. And so Bad Billy Beard Balm here in San Antonio is who I use for my beard care products. I don't get paid to plug that, but if they would like to sponsor me, that would actually save me quite a bit of cash. So that would be greatly appreciated, Bad Billy Beard Balm. But they're but kind of funny that I found them at a gun show. So that was kind of fun. But no, not too much maintenance. Just use shampoo in it when I wash it, and then I use beard balm, and it keeps. If you trim it pretty regular, it'll keep its shape most of the time. But sometimes things go a little wonky. But yeah, especially the wind, it'll blow it to the side. But sometimes you can pull the Civil War general when you're walking straight into the wind, and you'll get the weird split in the middle, and that's kind of fun. Okay, Jamie McDougall says, question, brand new brewer here. In every hobby I've ever been involved in, there are gear nerds. You know the type. Golfers that need the newest clubs, scuba divers that need the newest computers and regulars, etc. Some matters and some really makes no difference. I'm a bit of a gear nerd, but I want to keep a balance. I have a Unibrow Premium 120 system, 2 120 volt heaters, Anvil brew bucket, fermenter, and fridge to control fermentation temps with kegs with Keyser. How important is gear, and what gear really makes a difference in making great beer? That's a really interesting question. So I'm going to try to unpack it because I like gear too. And I find it trouble being content with the gear I have because there's always something new and shiny. But at some point, there are people out there still using, igloo coolers with false bottoms, doing batch bars that are making excellent beer. There are people out there with 3 vessel systems, home brewing, that are making great beer. There are people out there with your unibrow system making great beer. And there's people like me. I have 2 Delta all-in-one brewing systems, and I'm still managing to what I think is great beer as well. And so to me, the gear can be important, but really it's your familiarity with the gear to know the right processes to make that gear work for you. So to me, the gear is important. Having a nice unibrow system, from what I understand, they make pretty solid products. Anvil Brew Bucket, stainless steel fermenter, again, a good product. Firm control, you have all the right check boxes there. But it's really, to me, the gear is important, but you almost need to have processes with that gear that work for you. And I don't like to make processes that I have to work for necessarily. My brewing style is what matters, kind of. That's why I'm kind of drawn to Brewlosophy and some of the short and shoddy stuff, is because you're trying to distill down, what matters. Like sanitation matters, cleaning matters. Whether you're doing a 30-minute or a 90-minute mash, to be determined. The jury's still out. So to me, a lot of process stuff and making your processes work for you and your equipment matters a little bit more than some of the gear stuff. That said, I know there are probably people out there with plastic buckets to still make okay beer. I would say you're probably pretty hard pressed to make really good hazy IPA out of a plastic bucket, just because of the risk of introducing oxygen. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying you might be hard pressed to do so. And so I would definitely kind of roll with that. Make sure I'm not missing anybody over here. Okay, cool. Hopefully I answered your question well enough, but just throw a follow-up in there. But yeah, I think you're on the right path. I would just make sure your processes are in place with your cleaning, sanitization, but controlling temperature and all that stuff is really great. And then once you kind of get base processes down, Jamie, since you're pretty new, to get a good base process, John Palmer's How to Brew. Hey, I hear he's the guest for next month. Maybe that's a spoiler alert that hasn't come out on a podcast yet. But John Palmer's How to Brew is a really great resource for just kind of getting those basic processes down. And then you can kind of skip, do your kind of jump to the conclusions of things and go from there. So while I'm waiting for another question to come in, I'll just hop back into where I was talking about my time in Gitmo, because my time in Gitmo is kind of where I got into home brewing. Missouri didn't have the best beer selection, but it had some. Gitmo was a little bit harder to come by. I remember getting there and they didn't have Shiner, so I went and talked to Mark, who is the guy that was the manager over the Exchange, which was the main store on the island that kind of had the commissary and all the beer and everything else. And I said, hey, man, can we get some Shiner? He's like, yeah, no problem. We'll put in an order. And so we got on the Shiner package, according to Mark, and we got Shiner Bock, 1 pallet of Shiner Bock one time. And then after that, it was nothing but Shiner seasonal stuff. So you would get like Shiner Christmas Cheer, which is an okay beer, but like, it stuck around for a while, because after you get through a 12-pack of Christmas Cheer, you're not really in the mood for it so many days after that. You've already hit the 12 days of Christmas at that point. Then you would get like Shiner Ruby Redbird, which is one of their seasonals that supposedly uses like ruby red grapefruit, and I think it has like ginger in it too, because it has like this ginger quality that I really enjoy and kind of think is tasty. And so you get the random Shiner ones. I think I said, might have alluded to the Command Master Chief at the time. Cool dude. He was a home brewer, actually. He was a big fan of Ice House, so you could get Ice House there, which was fun. You could get a lot of the Pacifico. You could get Red Stripe, of all things, Negro Modelo. But again, the beer selection left something to be desired, especially for somebody that really liked English ales and Belgian style ales. And so I really... So at some point, me and a friend named Alan Epley, who was talking about getting into home brewing, we were chatting about it. And then the next thing you know, my wife for Christmas ordered me a homebrew kit. So the reason I got into home brewing, it's all my wife's fault. So how about that? But Gitmo has its challenges. To ship something, you don't just ship it to Cuba, because we don't really, at least at that point in time, and I still don't think we do have like relationships with Cuba to like have anything like flown in or whatever. So everything would get taken to Florida, and then it would be put on a barge, and that barge would go from Florida all the way around in between Hispaniola and Cuba, and then come up into Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and so at the Naval Air Station, and if you're stationed in Gitmo, we were confined to that 45 square mile base, and that includes water, restricted areas with landmines, everything, and so you're just kind of restricted there. The big joke always was that it's on the barge. So they had a place called O'Kelly's, which was supposed to be the only Irish pub on communist soil. And you would go in and you're like, they're out of Guinness. You're like, hey man, where's the Guinness at? And they're like, oh, it's on the barge. I remember going to Taco Bell, because there was a Taco Bell and a McDonald's and some other little restaurants there. And you'd go to Taco Bell and they're like, oh, we're sorry, we're out of taco shells. Okay, cool. Where are the taco shells? Like, it's on the barge. And so that's like just kind of the punchline of the whole Gitmo experience is on the barge. I remember, McDonald's being out of basically everything, because I guess there was a storm or something, or an order got delayed, and like McDonald's is out of everything. You're walking up and they're selling you it wasn't even a BLT, it was a BTL, bacon tomato lettuce, not a bacon lettuce tomato. So somebody wrote the signs a little wonky, but it was pretty cool. There was a golf course, 9-hole golf course. Just side facts, I'll try not to go too far off the rails here, but it was, lots of people envision like Cuba as being very tropical and having lots of rain and everything. And the rest of Cuba probably was, because you could see rain in the distance. But where Gitmo is, it's a very arid part of the island. So there's like lots of cactus, not a lot of native palm trees, lots of cactus, lots of Cuban rock iguanas. And when you went to go play golf, they had a 9-hole golf course, and it was free to play on, and you could rent clubs for free. And they would give you like this little piece of like AstroTurf, and you would go hit the ball off the driving box, tee box, and wherever it landed, it probably would hit a rock, and sometimes it hit a rock and bounce 10 feet back at you. Sometimes hit a rock and propel it on forward, but it would always land on rocks. And so you have to take this piece of AstroTurf and put it down and play. And then if you were on the first hole and you got lucky, you'd hit into a spot where you'd find old 30 cal bullets, because it used to be the rifle range. And so, some fun Gitmo facts. But anyways, I got a kit, and my first kit was an amber ale, and it was infected because whatever kit we bought didn't include any kind of sanitizers, and they sold One Step, which One Step supposedly does cleaning and sanitizing in one step according to some of the instructions, but whatever instructions those were, I apparently my novice homebrewing self didn't understand. And so I had this lovely green apple flavor, and had I been into lambics, it probably would have been a really cool thing to age around and blend and do something cool with. But it's your first beer, and so you hate to hate it. And so I ended up mixing Guinness and sour apple beer to make like a sour apple snake bite, and it was kind of interesting. I'll move beyond sour apple snake bites in a second. So Havo Shiner Prickly Pear is the bomb. Actually, Shiner Prickly Pear is really good. I actually really enjoy that. I've had it several times. I don't think that was, because we were in Gitmo around 2009, 2010, somewhere in there. And I don't know. No, it's 2010 and 11. So the 2.5 years were there. I'm not sure that Prickly Pear was as big a thing. It may have been, and I just don't remember. So my wife bought me a Mr. Beer kit from the PX, is what Kevin Brand said. And so what's funny is another guy at Gitmo, his wife bought him a Mr. Beer kit, and they actually made like a Mexican lager, and I don't remember it being disgusting. So Mr. Beer kit's a great way to get into this little hobby. Okay, Jesse Burke. Hey, Will, one thing you guys don't talk about much is fermenting in kegs. I do 10-gallon batches and ferment in 2 6.5-gallon kegs in a firm chamber. Any experiences fermenting in kegs? What are you fermenting in? So Jesse, I actually have 2 kegmenters. So they actually are they're from Kegland. You can go to morebeer.com and look for them. If you're really sweet, you'll use the affiliate link to get there if you're going to buy one. But like it's a big 7.5-gallon keg. But instead of having like a normal lid like a lot of kegs do, it's got like a 4-inch tri-clamp fitting with a plate that's got 2 ball-lock posts on top. So it essentially is a a keg that I'm fermenting in. The difference is that the keg miners, I think, are only rated to go up to like 35 psi, where I know if you're doing like a real keg, you can go up a little higher. But so essentially I am fermenting in kegs basically. But I would say, and I know some of the other guys, I know Alex has done some fermenting in kegs. If you go back in the way back machine, I think Matt Del Fiacco, who used to be a full-time contributor, talked a bit about fermenting in kegs. I would just say that I think you're doing a good thing with 6.5 gallon kegs, because that gives you that headspace there that can accommodate some of the foaming and things. I know if you're using just like used 5 gallon kegs, which is what some people do, you need to either reduce your batch size quite a bit and then maybe use some kind of anti-foaming liquid in there just to kind of get that down. But I like fermenting kegs. Even though like we have not I haven't had the experience that pressure fermentation makes a difference in what things taste like, and I know that we don't have any experiments that say that pressure fermentation does have a discernible difference in, at least as far as taste. I still enjoy pressure fermentation quite a bit because I like saving money on CO2, and so if I pressure ferment at 15-20 psi, which is within the limits of my 35 psi on the keg miner, I can basically cold crash that and then put it in a keg, and like it's ready. I'm basically ready to drink. Maybe it's a little undercarb, but within 12 hours it's there and it's perfectly ready to drink. And so I'm a big fan of that, and I love saving money on CO2. Craig Graham, a tale as old as time. Tale as old as time. There you go. There's my one singing there for you. Wife needs to buy a Christmas present, so gets beer kit. Husband takes it to a level wife didn't know existed. Yeah, I don't know. My wife actually likes beer, and so I think that's helpful. I know there are some people out there whose wives aren't big fans of drinking beer, and so I have to say, like, support of my spouse for my hobby, for being a contributor here. If I didn't have that, I'm not sure I would be at the level that I am today. But I do love that she likes to drink beer, and her favorite styles are like Belgian Trappist ales, which I'm a big fan of as well. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. I have it on my list of things to talk about if you guys don't ask enough questions. So if you don't want to hear about Belgians, y'all need to really crank out some questions. That's all I'm saying. But basically, I'm a big fan of the Belgian triples, doubles, and Belgian strong dark or quad or whatever you want to call them. I like calling them quads because it's just easier and it makes numerical sense. And then he also asks, any beer styles you don't like? In general, I'm not a fan of American wheat. I'm not a fan of I'll drink German wheat beer. I like it compared to American wheat beers, but I don't particularly like wheat beers all that much. There are several styles that are I had a friend bring over like a fruited hazy IPA and some fruited sours, and it's not that I don't like them necessarily, but generally speaking, like if you bring me a 60-ounce can of like fruited sour, I will probably share that amongst 4 people, because about 3-4 ounces is all I really want of that particular style typically. Some of them are a little easier to drink than others, but I've definitely there's this, I think it's Dew Claw. I don't have the can on me, but it's called Unicorn Farts. It's not brewed here in Texas, but it was on the store shelves, and it was like a glittered sour, and so like you basically have to roll the can around and then get the glitter back in suspension, and then you pour it, and it's not really a horrible sour beer. In fact, I have a really cool video of it. Like my wife had a cup with like little nucleation points on the bottom that were there intentionally, and so it was like all the CO2 pushing the glitter back into suspension. I took a little video of that, and it's just like mesmerizing. So it was a fun beer to drink, a really fun beer to try, but about 4 ounces of that is all I really needed to know that it was a fun beer to drink. It was not that it was a bad beer. It was just a fun beer. Also, everyone wish Martin Keene a happy birthday. It's his birthday today, in case you're curious. So favorite. So hopefully that makes sense. Other beer styles I don't like. I'm usually willing to give anything a try. I don't know. There's a lot of beer styles that maybe I don't want to drink a lot of. I'm currently working on a Saison thing, and I don't mind Saison, but I usually only drink about a 750 ml bottle of Saison DuPont once a year, and so having 10 gallons is going to be kind of fun. So there's some beers that it's not that I don't like them, it's just maybe I don't want them in large quantities. Any hazy milkshake IPA thingy or hazy or a fruited sour dessert stout blobbity, I'm probably only going to want to try just a little bit of it, and it could be that it's well done. It's just those things aren't my cup of tea typically. Have a friend that's really into like pastry stout kind of things, and I enjoy trying them. They're not something I want to sit down and just drink. I'd much rather sit down and drink a Helles. Favorite style to brew from Scott Steenberg. In your opinion, what's the most difficult style to brew, and what tips do you have to improve success? What's the strangest ingredient you've brewed with? Love your contributions to Brewlawsuit. Thanks, Scott. I really appreciate that. Words of affirmation are very nice, and they're sprinkled in with this gig, but sometimes you gotta work through the poisoning people with coffee comments as well. So appreciate that. Favorite style to brew is hard. So kind of what got me into this was more English ales, and especially Belgian ales. I know nobody gets into homebrewing to save money per se, but I think if you are going to have a money saving option, like homebrewing a Belgian quad and producing a quad for, less than $1 a bottle. Whereas if you go buy like Rochefort 10 off the shelf at your local, Total Wine or wherever you're getting your bottles from, is going to be like probably $9-10 a bottle. There is quite a bit of savings if you're really into that style. Granted, most people don't want to brew 5 gallons of that or have 5 gallons of that on hand. My wife would disagree with that, and we tend to go through a Belgian dark strong pretty fast. Our strong dark BSD, BDS, I don't know. We'll figure out how that goes in a second. But most difficult style to brew, I'll tell you the style. I don't know if it's the most difficult to brew, but it's the style that I've only attempted a handful of them because I'm not the biggest fan of the style. But as far as difficulty, like I have messed up more hazy IPAs. I don't know what it is. Like I'm just like snake bit. I made one time, the first one I ever made, and I was just kind of spitballing it. I was really messing with the water chemistry and kind of did more of a balanced water profile versus favoring chloride. And that one turned out like amazing. And it was like all these crazy fruity flavors, and I had a little more of that crisp finish that I like, and a little less of a lingering finish that I don't care for in hazy typically. And it was such a good beer. And so I tried to like do a recreation of that. And every time I do, there's something weird that happens. Like, inside of my keg mentors, there's the plate, and it has like a little floating dip tube that it's using. And for some reason, that floating dip tube on at least a couple of occasions has come loose. And if you catch it early enough, it's pretty cool. But if you're doing a hazy IPA and you don't catch it until you're packaging, you're probably going to introduce a little bit of oxygen whenever you're going back in to reattach it. But I've just had more problems with that particular style. Trying to get it to go right. And if I was going to tell you how to brew a successful hazy, I personally prefer a balanced water profile over one that hits chloride hard. That's more preference. I think that, the things you should do to improve it. I think anything to reduce oxygen exposure. I think dry hopping at yeast pitch and doing all your dry hops then is not a horrible idea, just because you're limiting opportunities for oxygen to get in there, because that yeast is going to scavenge it pretty immediately. And so that's a style that I like to just do anything I can to reduce oxygen. I think when you go to the keg, if you're able to insert potassium metabosulfite or anything to help reduce the risk of oxidation once you're in the keg. Again, filling up with Star San, pushing all the Star San out with CO2. If you're able, sometimes you can get those cool little bottle things where you can inject liquid, sometimes gelatin or just something with a potassium metabosulfite solution or sodium metabosulfite solution in there to help reduce oxidation that way. There are lots of little tricks that you can do. I think there's some other kind of fun things out there to help reduce oxidation that you can try, like that can contain absorbic acid and some of those things. But just anything you do to reduce oxygen is a huge thing with a hazy. Granted, it's not my favorite style, but that's the one that's given me the most fits. Still thinking about favorite style to brew. I do like brewing a good Belgian. I think there's a lot of either triple, quad. I think I do love brewing those styles. I like the levers you can play with the yeast and with the types of sugar you can use. I think that's a lot of fun. I also I like brewing lagers as well. I like to have a Helles or an amber lager on tap. Whether it's a Vienna lager or Czech amber, whatever, I really like to have those styles around. They're just, especially amber lagers, because they're super flavorful, super crushable, and they work well for a little bit of that malty character, both in the summer going on into fall and winter. So pretty versatile drinks in my opinion. Strangest ingredient that I've ever brewed with, that one, I'm not a huge person that goes really crazy. So one time a friend of mine challenged me to make a taco beer. And so I don't know that I brewed with it because I wasn't bold enough to make a full 5 gallons of taco beer. But what I did is I took some Lowry's taco seasoning and made a tincture and vodka with it. And then essentially he lives in Florida. And so I live in Texas, in San Antonio. And so I literally, just dosed individual bottles with several drops of taco seasoning tincture, then put Vienna lager on top of that I had brewed, and it was a really tasty Vienna lager. So you had a Mexican amber taco beer, and it wasn't horrible. Drinking 12 ounces is probably fine, but I think the base Vienna lager was much, much better. So that was a strange ingredient. I guess brown sugar is not that strange of an ingredient, but it is an ingredient that I poo-pooed on for a while for Belgians. And then I had kind of a weird thing happen where I might have discussed this in a previous podcast or somewhere. I had a weird thing happen where I brewed it right before a big snowstorm hit San Antonio, and our power went out for like 4 days. And so that Belgian quad had cooled down quite a bit and fermentation had stopped. And so for reasons I can go into later, I like to add my sugar additions for most Belgian, especially big Belgian beers, in the fermenter. And so I hadn't added my expensive D180 or D90 candy syrup that I had. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to, I'll take a pound of brown sugar. I'll make a simple syrup. I'll dump that in there and see what happens. And it's really inspired me to explore kind of types of sugar a lot more, and not just, because there was a definite perceptible impact between that and then the quad I made later with the D180 syrup. And I've made a beer combining both of those products, brown sugar and D180, and been very, very pleased with the results. That was kind of a fun one. Okay, Jamie says, given that I'm not interrupting 50 people, mind a dumb newbie question. Man, you're here to ask questions, brother, so just keep asking away. No need to preface anything. When transferring using closed transfer to keg, do you bleed CO2 through your lines that connects out the valve of the fermenter, or not worry about that very small amount of air? And then Scott actually kind of responded to him. He says, I CO2 flush all tubing, but interested to hear others' thoughts. So honestly, it's not really that hard to, so what I like to do is I'll put my CO2 on the gas post, and then I'll basically, transfer the Star Sand from one keg to another first. And so before I transfer from my fermenter to my keg, I'm basically transferring first. So by the time I hook up the little jumper I have that's going from this ball lock post to this other keg, that air is getting pushed out into the next keg. And so it's not something I really think about. Otherwise, like, it's super easy to bleed this CO2 out of something. If your keg's empty and you got it attached, in little pressure, you can just push that little pin inside and CO2 will bleed out. I do tend to get really weird. Like, before I hook up my gas post to my keg miners, I'll turn the gas on, but that'll also just bleed a little bit of CO2 out that gas post, just to make sure if there was any air sitting on the end or whatever, that it gets pushed out. I don't know that there is or there isn't, but it just seems like 2 seconds of cheap insurance. So the fluid line, yeah. So again, I'll take whatever keg I'm going to use. It's full of Star San, and I'll put that jumper onto another keg that's empty that I may or may not be using later. And that CO2 is just going to push all that Star San through that jumper line. And essentially, when it's empty, I'll take that same jumper line that's now empty, full of CO2 that's been pushing into another keg, and then I'll pop it on to the keg minter, and then it'll transfer. And so it's pretty well flushed with CO2 at that point. But if you're still worried about it, you can always just push the little thing with some CO2. If you've got CO2 hooked up to your keg and it comes out, you can just push that thing up. So if I'm not explaining that well, okay, he's got it. Good. Ron Forster wants to know what my favorite Belgian yeast is. I think traditionally, when I think of Trappist beers, most of the Trappist beers that I drink a lot of use the Westmalle strain. Westmalle. Somebody can give me a lesson in how to pronounce that at some point in time. But the Westmalle strain, which is like I believe that's Imperial's, is that B48 triple double. It's White Labs WLP 530. And to me, that's kind of the go-to Belgian yeast for me. I think the gold standard for Trappist triple is probably the Westmalle triple. I think it's not my favorite triple. My favorite triple is the Gare, but Westmalle triple is probably what I think if you had a picture in the dictionary that said Belgian triple and you put the bottle of that right next to that picture, that would be enough description. If I was going to do judging and needed somebody to have like a palate adjusting beer to say this is what the style is, that's what I would pick. Are there better examples? Like I said, I prefer the Gare over that one, but that's. But there's also a lot worse out there, and I think it's probably like the standard for me. So I like using WLP 530, B48, triple, double. That's the Westmalle strains what I'm going to go with, especially for triples. Now in dark strongs, I've used the Chimay strain a few times, which I don't remember the number on that one. I'm sorry. I don't know if Imperial has one. I've used the Chimay strain a few times, and that's probably my second favorite strain for the darker doubles and dark strongs is the Chimay strain. I really like those. Oh, Belgian fermentation tips. Man, you're just taking the wind out of my sails for what I was going to talk about later, so we'll just get to it since you have the questions. For me, it's always a good idea to make a starter. But one of the reasons I said earlier that I do not add sugar to the boil, and I tend to add the candy syrup or whatever it is into the fermenter, is because it's going to be a little easier on your yeast when your sugar's adding like 20 points of gravity. It's a lot easier on your yeast to pitch that stuff into the fermenter after it's been going for a few days and thinned out a little bit and got a pretty good yeast cell rate B cell growth rate built up. So I'll just go into the whole Belgian thing. We'll get to fermentation in a second. I think for a lot of Belgian styles, we overcomplicate the grist. I think a lot of Americans tend to make caricatures of Belgians and not something like you would have in Belgium. There's a lot of Trappist ales going around that, people will add, not there's anything wrong with adding dates to a Belgian double, but I want to get that date flavor from either the sugar that I'm using or the fermentation characteristics. And so I think there's a lot of levers I want to pull before I do that. I'm not saying that I don't, overcomplicate my grist from time to time. I did make a triple one time. I called it, so this fun side story, and then I'll hop back into more fermentation stuff. But I made a triple where essentially I was in my recliner, drunk, playing on more beer, and somehow came up with this triple recipe and ordered all the ingredients while I was like hammered. And so like a week later, a package shows up in the mail. I'm like, what's this? Well, crud. I guess I ordered a whole bunch of things. And I mean, this recipe is wild. It has like 3 flaked adjuncts in it. It is like the most overcomplicated, like homebrew recipe of all homebrewers. But I ordered all the stuff and I looked at it and I'm like, you know what? Drunk me could be onto something. Let's sober me brew it. And so I brewed it. And for some reason, it had gin-soaked oak cubes in it. And I don't know that I actually picked up much from the gin-soaked oak cubes or not, but I essentially went through and did the gin-soaked oak cubes, and a beautiful triple came out. I was going to call it the Gentile triple since it had gin-soaked oak cubes. But my buddy came over and drank 2 or 3 glasses, and the next thing I know, he's a pretty calm guy, and he like looks at me, he's like, I have to go before I say something I regret. And he just looks at me very cold and calmly and like leaves. And I'm like, oh crap, where the hell did Curtis go? And the next day I talked to him, he's like, oh yeah, man, all of a sudden I didn't care if like the buildings burnt down. And so I called it the Nihilist triple after that, because I guess if you have too many of those, you'd be prone to nihilism. I'm working on a second iteration recipe of that right now. I think I'm going to call it Carl Hungus. If anybody gets the Big Lebowski reference, there you go. But yeah, so in general though, especially with WP 530, I would start fermentation pretty cool, like 62, 64. Again, your malt bill shouldn't be too terribly crazy. Again, you want to get most of your character from the sugars you're using, from your levers and fermentation temperature. But I usually start them cool because B48 triple double WLP 530, they all ferment really crazy, and like you're going to want to use a blow off tube, or you're going to have a crazy mess, because I always end up having a crazy mess. I've had plastic buckets where it just like it's popped open the lid and like got the stickiest, nastiest krausen you ever saw in your entire life coming out the side. Then now you're cleaning up and you're just happy it's in your firm chamber, not in your living room closet or something. So I always start those cool, and then after you kind of get over that kind of 3-4 days in, that high krausen kind of starts to peak and you start seeing it slow down, then that's usually when I'll add my sugar or candy syrup, whatever I'm using. In the case where I use brown sugar, I would make like a simple syrup and kind of integrate like a pound of sugar into half a cup of water, and just kind of let that kind of make a simple syrup, cool it off, and dump it in there. And then usually after about 5 days or a week, then I'll start ramping it up into the lower 70s just to make sure that I can kind of get that attenuation coming out. That said, I did do a Belgian triple with a short and shoddy, and that sucker was at like 77, 80 degrees the entire time, because I did let it ferment out in my living room, and it blew through fermentation, and it had some really funky flavors like when it was super young, because we're doing short and shoddy. I turned around and served it pretty quick, and it had some weird like peppery notes and things that I wasn't necessarily going for. But then after I'd collected all the data, of course, because we were doing short and shoddy, like I still had to hang out for another month. And then a lot of those weird, funkier flavors that I didn't really care for, like the pepper, kind of, I don't know how to describe it. Maybe like a white pepper flavor. It wasn't like green pepper or black pepper. It's almost like a white pepper kind of pepperiness. But that all faded out, and it turned out to be a really amazing beer after that. So some of these yeasts may produce some funkiness and with weird fermentation temperatures or higher fermentation temperatures, but I think that calms out quite a bit over time. And so the best thing for some of these bigger beers is time.
More Q&A with Brewlosophy's Will Lovell right after this break. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of work, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Xchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Xchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you.
Looking for a new career? Welcome to Do HVAC Training Service Center in North Charleston. Enroll today in our comprehensive HVAC training hands-on field experience-based program, covering troubleshooting, maintenance, installation, and more on various HVAC systems and ductwork. We offer EPA and NAEP preparation and testing, along with various certifications. Enjoy payment options. Achieve certification in under 5 months. Enroll now for your new journey of skill development and career advancement. Log on to DEWHVACTrainingSC.com to inquire.
Kevin Brand says, Belgian quads are one of my favorite styles of drink, but I have not had success in duplicating. So I share that pain. I've tried to brew whatever clone it is. I've tried to brew Rochefort clone using the Rochefort yeast the one time I tried it. I've tried to do a lot of other things. Probably what helped me was stop looking at clone recipes, and then I read Brew Like a Monk, and that's a really great book. And the problem people have with Brew Like a Monk, I think, is that it doesn't really tell you how to brew a good beer per se. It doesn't like give you a recipe and step by step tell you how to nail it. It just shows you a lot of different methods that different Trappist style breweries are doing, and then it's kind of giving you like a framework. And the big thing I took from it is like kind of envision in your mind like where you want to go and what you want to, how you want to get there. And a lot of these, like I said, overcomplication of grists, a lot of these Belgian Abbeys are just using very pale malt, and they're getting a lot of their color and flavor from the different types of candy syrup they're using. Again, the D180, D90, I can't remember the brand of candy syrup that is, but they add some good flavors to it. You can play with making your own simple syrups out of like me brown sugar or turbinado or whatever it is you want to try. And those are all different levers you can pull. And then getting your fermentation, again, I would start cool just to keep from making a big mess. But if you're not getting what you want by starting cool and ramping up, then start a little warmer and ramp up, and you'll that temperature lever is a big one to just kind of play with and see where you can get your process down. But they are a finicky style. I usually keg condition mine because I tend to age my quads for 300 days before I drink them. And so usually by about the time I get around to tapping one, because I don't like to bottle anymore, so I usually keg condition. But about the time I get around to tapping one, I will end up brewing the next one, which I'm 6 months behind on my quad right now. So I need to get one in the fermenter. But yeah, another thing too that I find kind of a tip or trick is there's a reason Dingman's Pils malt is used for a lot of these beers, but I think using an undermodified, because Dingman's is pretty undermodified Pilsner malt, but I think using these undermodified malts definitely makes a bit of a difference whenever you're doing these things, because it's just you have to use that much more Pilsner malt to get the same gravity, and that definitely adds some more character to the beer from that malt forward perspective. So I would definitely, if you're not going to use Dingman's, some other slightly undermodified, maybe a floor malted Pilsner malt in your triples and quads, I think that's helpful. I'd have to go looking up quad recipes, but there's most of the time I do tend to use a smidge of Special B, some Cara Vienna, some Cara Munich or equivalent, and then like I said, the syrups I like to use are like the D180 candy syrup, and then I did like a pound or two of D180, and then like a pound of brown sugar in this last one, and it turned out really excellent, really great. Had a friend come over and he compared it to Ackle, which is high praise. If you've ever had Ackle's Trappist Belgian quad, it's fantastic. So big fan of that. But yeah, cool. So if there's any more Belgian questions, I do like answering Belgian questions. I'm a huge fan. Cool. Scroll over here, make sure I'm not missing anybody, but I think we're keeping up to date. Yep. So, brewing in Gitmo is where I was on that story, but we can go back kind of there. I don't really remember many of the other beers I brewed in Gitmo. I guess they didn't turn out that great because it was all extract with steeping grains. And so we eventually moved, after that, my wife got stationed in Germany. We were in Kaiserslautern, and that was a great spot. And then we just talked about Belgian ales. And so talking about being in Mecca, a lot of my opinions around making Belgian beers and what makes a good Belgian beer is definitely based in my time in Belgium. And then I actually fell in love with German lagers there because a lot of the German lagers you get here in the States have been on a barge. Joke, it's on the barge, right? And it's coming across the ocean, and then you're not getting like the freshest version of that. Whereas when you're having Bitburger, down the street from where Bitburger is made, totally different experience, super amazing Pilsner. And so we did a lot of that drinking there. I didn't homebrew as much in Germany as you might expect because I was out there enjoying all the Trappist ales that I could get my hands on, enjoying all the German lagers that I get my hands on, just really great beers there. So, amazing experience. And then but I would still brew probably a stout or two a year because I couldn't get stouts very easily, even though the UK was just to the north of us. I couldn't get stouts very easily. And then occasionally like something hoppy because those are things that were harder to get. I could get all the really good Trappist ales. I would make beer runs up to where they make West Flandern 12, Westie 12 as you might call it, but the VL, that's kind of an FL sound is my understanding with the Flemish. So West Flandern 12. And so I actually had the opportunity to call the beer line to the Abbey, make a reservation to pick up 2 cases. And then like €100 later, I'm driving back home with 2 cases, a Westie 12 in the back. So that's like, 48 beers worth of Westie 12 for $100. Dirt cheap compared to what you could get it around here. And then I would stop at different little bottle shops and grocery stores and pick up all the cheese and Belgian beers that I just wanted to try. And I, somewhere I have pictures of like my trunk where I had the back of my car and it was just like full of like beer and cheese because that's what I wanted from Belgium typically. And occasionally some chocolate. They got some good chocolate too. So triples. So Belgian triples, I think if you go back and look at the actual short and shoddy recipe that I made, that is actually not a bad base for a Belgian triple, in my opinion. So maybe Pilsner malt. I think I had a touch of wheat and a touch of aromatic. I used, I think it was Hallertau Mittelfrühe for bittering and maybe a mid to late boil addition. And then you want to use like a nice neutral sugar. You can go and use golden candy syrup. I thought that triple came out really well, and then I used table sugar. Again, the biggest thing there is I think yeast and thyme. On the short and shoddy one, I don't know that I would recommend doing it, but I started it like I just set it in my office basically where it's 77 degrees in the summer and let it just blow through. And it actually turned out pretty well. I think I would still do something similar to what I suggested with the quad, where I might start it a little lower, probably mid 60s, and then just kind of ramp it up over a few days. Definitely use a blow off tube because you're going to make a big mess if you're using the West Mall yeast strain. And I think West Mall to me is what I associate with triples. And so use that B48 triple double, use your WLP 530, whatever it is. If you're really good to yourself, make a starter. That really helps move things along, but also can make for a bigger mess. Walter Foster also says, I can't make a good Duvel clone. So Duvel, if I'm thinking right, they might have a triple, but I thought theirs was like a slightly different style, more of a blonde. And it's, I like Duvel. I really like Duvel in Belgium because Duvel in Belgium tastes really different than the one here in the U.S. It was a lot fresher, a lot nicer, and a lot cleaner. I don't really drink much Duvel here because a lot of especially the triple hop. So the Duvel triple hop is like kind of a seasonal release, and you can get it here, but a lot of that hop character is kind of oxidized out by the time it gets here, unfortunately. So, but I do like Duvel, especially in Europe. Big fan of it there. Cool. So, hopefully I answered your triple questions a little bit, but you can always email me. Anybody that has any more questions or wants any more follow-up, just email me, will@brewlosophy.com, and I'm happy to initiate some conversations. I recognize some of you guys from the Brew Club, and so I'm sure you can ping there and tag me in a post or something or on Discord, and I'm happy to answer there as well. and we can go through some recipes and things that I've got. I don't have my brew father up right now. I guess I could, but I don't have that to go through. But I'm more than happy to go through recipes and talk about, different things to go about making good Belgians. Okay. Yep. So after Germany, we moved back to the States. My wife got out of the Army. We moved to San Antonio, Texas, where I am right now. I worked for about a year part-time in a local homebrew shop. So that was a pretty cool experience. I had basically gotten away from brewing extract at that point, was doing all grain, was just doing, it was a cooler. I had like a Igloo cube cooler. I didn't pay for the round cooler because they were too expensive, but it was like a cube. Paid $30 for it, and they used that as a mash tun and did batch sparging, and that served me pretty well. The thing, it made it harder though, because your brew days are always like 6 to 7 hours, and then I had a kid that was relatively young, so it was kind of hard to squeeze in those 6-7 hour brew days with a small child, and so. Kegging helped a lot. I think I got into kegging once I moved back to the States, because getting CO2 over in Germany was a nightmare, and I wasn't brewing quite enough for that. So I got back into kegging. Here, got back into more all grain brewer, and then eventually I wound up with an electric all-in-one system. My first one was a Brewzilla, and then I have 2 Delta all-in-one systems, and electric. I kind of joke with people that kegging and electric brewing systems are probably the 2 of the biggest reasons that I still Kevin's like, K-Town was his first duty station 94. It was a gateway to this hobby. Yeah, man, getting good fresh lagers, getting good Belgians. Sometimes it's easier to just brew your own than try to get the taste of Germany and some other places, although a lot of good lagers have popped up around the US here in the last few years, but that wasn't always the case. But yeah, so electric all-in-ones and kegging are probably the 2 reasons that I'm still in this hobby. I think if I would have not gotten either one of those, I may not have done it. The electric all-in-ones, for a while, I was using it in the kitchen before I kind of got a little bit of a climate control in my garage. But being able to like brew in the middle of summer without having to like crank up a propane, burner and sit out in the garage and melt all day was a big win for me. The ease of cleanup, and then the big thing is being able to like split your day up more easily. So I love, one of my favorite things to do is Friday night, prep the grain, prep the water, get all the water into my Delta all-in-ones, and then I'll set a timer to delay warming it up until sometime early in the morning. And so basically I'll wake up and my water's at strike temp, and I can just walk downstairs, and then my grain's already prepped, and I can just start my brew day. And so that way to kind of do quite a bit of work the night before to get prepped up and ready to go, and then being able to do it the next day. And then, you kind of get in a groove where now that your mash is done, you get to clean out your malt pipe and get some of those things cleaned up, clean up a brew bag if you're using one of those inside your malt pipe like I do, and get that stuff cleaned up and just move along. And that's been a game changer for me. So I'm a big fan of that. Somewhere around 2021, I joined the Brew Club leadership. And that's been a really cool thing and a really cool journey. There's kind of a joke that Steve Thanos said one time, is that, the Brew Club is kind of the B League for Brewlosophy, because, Kay Job came from the Brew Club. I came from the Brew Club. Alex Shanks-Abel, who's a new contributor as well, came from the Brew Club. And so it is kind of true, but it kind of shows, experiments. It's not, if you haven't done an experiment, for the Brew Club Experiment Series, it's a pretty cool thing to do at least one time, and you get a really good appreciation of what contributors go through all the time. And so after I did my first experiment through the Brew Club, I had a great appreciation, and so I'm really honored to be a contributor now in Brewlosophy. In 2022, I became a contributor in June of last year. Funny story, I got a message that was sent out to several other people on the leadership team about joining Brewlosophy, and I think I was walking on the beach in Aruba, and I was talking to my wife about it, and we both agreed that it was a good idea. So, again, supportive spouses is a huge thing. We talked about Belgians, which was on my list of things to do. Big fan of Texas barbecue, so I'll start some fights here and say that brisket is the king in the barbecue scene, and that I think every barbecue spot worth its salt should have brisket. Now, granted, I may not agree with how brisket's made in other places, but a huge fan of brisket. I guess when we moved to Missouri, one of the things that I did is because we lived in the middle of nowhere, and so I was homesick for barbecue, and I remember going to a place and ordering brisket and not getting exactly what I wanted from that particular barbecue spot. In fact, I think they didn't even have like sliced brisket or anything. They just had like pulled brisket, like pulled pork, and it wasn't bad, but it just wasn't like good either, and it wasn't what I wanted. And so I had to learn how to kind of smoke my own brisket. I'm originally from like Northeast Texas. So I was pretty used to having Cajun Creole food in my back door, and so got some nice cookbooks and learned how to cook a lot of Cajun Creole food. So I think there's a lot of ingenuity that comes from not having something closely available. And my venture into barbecue, similar to my venture into brewing, started out at least with a lack of not having something there that I craved or desired, and then kind of snowballed into something bigger than there. Because now I live in Texas. I'm actually going to go to Franklin Barbecue tomorrow in Austin, and we're going to get, I'm not sure if you know this, pro tip, don't spread it with everyone, but you can get Franklin Barbecue in Austin to go. So you can set up, if you book it far enough out, you can set up a time to pick up Franklin Barbecue and skip the line, because normally, if you're not familiar with Franklin, they're popular enough that people start getting in line for their barbecue at like 6 in the morning, and you have to wait until they open till 11 to get in, and who knows, if you get there at 6 in the morning, you may be still 30 minutes of in line after they open trying to get served. So it's really cool to be able to go and get it pick up to go. And then Live Oak Brewing is not very far from Franklin, and Live Oak, a lot of notoriety with Live Oak, and so you can just kind of drive around the corner to Live Oak and eat your Franklin barbecue, eat some of the best barbecue in the state with some of the best loggers in the state, and hard to complain. That sounds like a great day to me. So Jamie McDougall, thanks for the content. Appreciate all of you at Velocity. I've listened to the show 1.5 years, and it's been instrumental in enabling my brewing. All of you make yourselves as available as you do is greatly appreciated. I thanks for the kind words, Jamie. I know I can't speak on behalf of everybody, but I know pretty much everybody at Velocity very much appreciates that sentiment. Walter Foster says, brisket is intriguing, but haven't been willing to drop $50+ on an experiment. Oh, well, so I don't know. I guess I've been doing it for a while. And so, there are things you do to kind of hedge your bets with brisket. So sometimes if you spend a little bit more than $50 and push it up to closer to 100, you can get prime brisket, and that kind of hedges your bets a little bit. I would definitely suggest, though, if you get a new smoker or you're just getting into smoking meats, pork butts, as much as I make fun of pulled pork, because I do make fun of pulled pork quite a bit, they're a much cheaper thing to cut your teeth on. A rack of ribs is a much cheaper thing to cut your teeth on. A turkey breast is a much cheaper thing, an easier thing to cut your teeth on, and they all take less time. And then once you kind of get pork down, because I think pork is a little more forgiving, maybe you get you some of those dino beef ribs and get a couple of, basically a pair of them together, and they're like huge. Looks like you're eating a brontosaurus rib from the Flintstones, and you can basically try that out once you get into beef, and if you get that kind of down, then you can go up to the brisket. But $50 on an experiment. Worst case scenario, you'll have some smoked beef that you can throw into beans, and leftover brisket works really well in beans, even if you overcook it. You hate to have $50 worth of bean meat on hand, but you can divide it up into little half-pound pouches, vacuum seal it. And then even if you don't come out as juicy as you want, there's lots of things to be done with kind of over or undercooked brisket, where you can cut it up and use that smoke flare to add it to eggs. You can make, if you cut it up tight enough, you can make fried rice. I've made brisket boudin with leftover brisket, where boudin is traditionally it's a sausage casing with rice, and then usually some less desirable parts of the critter in there. But I'll take brisket, and then I'll saute some onions, saute the brisket in there with the onions, and then I'll add some Dr. Pepper into that and kind of get a caramelization thing going and kind of reconstitute the brisket after I dry it out a little bit. And then I'll mix that in with the rice and then stuff it in a sausage casing and then smoke it. But that's just me. So Scott Steenberg, he's trying to pick a fight with somebody because these are always nice, good conversations turn to fights when you do this. But butcher paper or foil, do you add anything to the brisket when you wrap? Tallow, butter, other. I have watched lots of Aaron Franklin, so I have been converted to butcher paper. I have used foil, and so if you wrap your brisket in foil, for those following at home, it's called the Texas Crutch. I will say, though, that if you're trying to crank out a brisket in a very short amount of time, wrapping in foil is the way to go, although it does kind of steam the meat, and so you lose some of that firmness, but at least you'll have juicy, tender meat and not something that's inedible, so maybe that's something else. I have not, so the last couple of experimental things I've done with brisket was when I wrapped it in the butcher tape paper, I did put tallow in it. I do some hunting, and I have venison on hand quite a bit. And one thing about venison is it doesn't have a lot of fat, right? And so I saw that I could buy tubs of Wagyu tallow. And so it's been pretty cool to take like this ground venison with basically no fat and add in some of that Wagyu tallow flavoring, just as I'm like, even for like, weird things like taco meat or whatever. And so I have been taking that because I read somewhere that they thought they caught Franklin adding Wagyu tallow to the butcher paper in his briskets, and I can't confirm or deny that it's true, but I have added Wagyu tallow into the butcher paper with my brisket, and it did come out nice and moist and pretty great. And if you have some on hand, that'd be pretty awesome. I'd be really curious to try butter. I'm a big fan of butter on steaks and other beef, so I don't know why butter wouldn't be really cool. So that's actually a good idea. I'd like to try butter, I think. And if you have any other ideas of things that I should be throwing into my butcher paper, I'm all ears. But I'm pretty much brisket's pretty simple. I just do, I'll take the brisket, I'll trim it, and then I'll slather it in mustard, and then I'm just a 50-50 salt and pepper kind of guy, and I'll put a pretty thick layer of that on the outside of the brisket, and then I will do fat side up on my smoker. I used to have like kind of a smoker with a side firebox stick burner kind of setup, and I kind of it died, and I was moving around, and so I got an opportunity to try out like a Kamado style grill, which is kind of like akin to the Big Green Eggs and the Kamado Joes, and it was a cheap knockoff one. I think it was Char Griller who made it. It was like their Acorn, which was like stainless steel, and it was pretty cheap. And I ended up turning out some really good briskets on that, and the temperature control was much easier, especially when I lived in Germany and it would get really cold, and I would still want to cook a brisket. And so now I have kind of a ceramic Costco knockoff of the Big Green Egg called the Louisiana Grills Kamado, and it's what I've been using lately. But I'll take my brisket, I'll put it on there, and I usually smoke brisket at about 250, which is higher than some people, lower than others. And I'll put a thermometer in there, and once it hits about 180, 185, that's when I'll usually pull it off to wrap it in butcher paper with some tallow. I'll keep a spray bottle to spritz. It's a 50-50 mix of water and apple cider vinegar, and I'll spritz that on the edges just to kind of keep those from getting too dried out. And it's, and then after the brisket, usually I'm shooting for a temp of anywhere between 195 and 205. Usually, once it gets up to 195, I'll take a temperature probe and I'll start trying to poke around. And if it starts going through like butter, it's done. And that's kind of my process. But I've got my Kamado to where I don't even care about, like, temperature control is super easy. It's super simple. If I'm working from home, it's kind of a set and forget, except for spritzing every hour or so. Oh man, Walter, I see it's like you've done some of the ones I mentioned, but not the expensive cuts like tomahawk steaks or brisket. Tomahawk steaks look really cool. and they taste fine because it's a ribeye, right? But I think you can just go get a bone-in ribeye and probably save yourself a little bit of money, because a lot of tomahawk steak is presentation, but it is really cool to hold the beef lollipop and like take pictures with it. But I've only done a handful of tomahawks just because the bone makes them a bit of a pain in the rear to cook, honestly. But they look really cool. So I've done a few. And really brisket, considering the fact that for $50 you're getting, I don't know what's a normal brisket, anywhere between 10 and 15 pounds of meat. Like it's not a bad thing. And I've made really good brisket with just the Walmart that wasn't even labeled choice or anything. They didn't even like rate it. And I've made good brisket with those. And I've also made good brisket with prime brisket. I've made good brisket with Wagyu briskets before. Those are fun to play with. So I would, definitely play around with some of that. But they can be expensive, especially if you go the Wagyu route. And Wagyu behaves a little differently than what I just described. So sometimes Wagyu's done closer to 190 to 195 rather than 200 to 205. But your mileage may vary on all of that. So, but lots of fun things you can play with on brisket. And then sometimes it gets a little cheaper, especially for the prime cuts, if you go to Costco. And Costco meat's actually pretty good. Here in San Antonio, we have H-E-B, and I usually just get them from there because it's easy and convenient. But yeah, definitely Costco. You can get some pretty decent cuts of meat. And I don't really have much in the way of recommendations for barbecue podcasts, because that was his next question, is any recommendations for barbecue podcasts? I don't tend to listen to a bunch of barbecue podcasts, so I don't really have any good recommendations for that. I will say, brisket, I described a pretty simple process with basically no sauce. I'm not opposed to like a ketchup based sauce. If you're going to mix that in with like your pulled pork. But the sauce I probably use more than anything is I have like a vinegar based mop sauce that I use when I make ribs. So when I smoke ribs, I have a sauce that's, vinegar, Worcestershire, a little bit of whiskey, mustard, all sorts of other fun things in there. And I'll use that as a mop sauce that after, the ribs have been on for a couple hours and the rub that I use is kind of solidified itself. And again, it's a much more complicated rub than what I do for brisket, because pork, to me, you need to infuse flavor into it. So you want to use a more flavorful rub. I do have like a vinegar based mop sauce that I like to mop on there just to keep it kind of moist. And there's enough sugar and some other things in there that it caramelizes on it really well and adds a lot of flavor to it. They're not a wet rib per se. When you get them off, they're a little sticky, but they're not like, I've definitely had some ribs where, the barbecue sauce is put on there at the very last second and it's just like super wet. And these aren't typically wet ribs. I usually make pork spare ribs because that's more of a Texas thing. I don't typically do baby backs, although I have, but I use the spare ribs and I'll kind of trim them down to make them look kind of like a rectangle. And then I like to, again, use something more flavorful, and then a mop sauce. And I used to foil my ribs. I don't foil them anymore. The foil kind of took away from some of the bark, and I'm a big fan of it. No, I don't wrap my ribs. I think I just said that. The main reason to wrap brisket is it kind of, if you're going to add tallow or something like that, it's going to hold all that moisture in. And the butcher paper on wrapping brisket's kind of a nice compromise, because with foil, you're not letting any breathing of that meat happen. It's all just kind of steaming. With butcher paper, it's going to help your cook time progress faster, but it's also going to kind of hold in some of that moisture, some of that tallow that you're putting in there. And so to me, brisket's kind of worth it. With the ribs, I did a side-by-side comparison on ribs a while back where I wrapped one set and then I didn't wrap the other one. And then the crispness of the bark, not a ton of crispness, but a little bit of crispness of the bark on the rib was much nicer on the one that I didn't wrap. So I stopped wrapping ribs. It didn't save me all that much time anyways. In my ribs, typically when I smoke them, they're not always like fall off the bone. Like you just pick up the bone there, all the meat falls off, but I do like it to have a little bit of firmness to stay on the bone. But when I bite it, I want it to come like right off. I don't have to chew. I don't have to pull. It's just like literally bite and come right off. And that to me is a perfect rib. I'm glad we're getting to barbecue philosophy. Let's talk about real things that matter, like barbecue. Favorite cut of barbecue, if any of you are curious, for me is, as much as I love brisket and Manhattan brisket, I do think beef ribs are probably my favorite cut of barbecue. They are super delicious, super flavorful, and I love it. So sauce during the cook or at the end. So on my ribs, when I use a sauce, a mop sauce, usually I'm mopping it. I'll wait 2 hours and then I'll mop it about every hour until it's done. And then, but usually I don't put a big mop on the end because it is a little bit of a very fluid sauce. It's not like thick like a ketchup based sauce is. It's very not very viscous, or low viscosity, I should say. And so I'll try to mop it on there, and I want basically that sugar that's in it and all those spices and things that are all in it. I want that to like kind of caramelize on the top and kind of stay on there. But beef ribs, I don't do much anything special with beef ribs. Sometimes I'll use like a Cholula hot sauce instead of mustard to get the salt and pepper to stick. I'll do like a Cholula hot sauce. Again, 50-50 salt and pepper. And then I don't usually wrap my beef ribs at all. I just let them cook until they're done, and they're pretty delicious. And it's more flavorful to me than brisket. But they take, instead of taking like all day, it takes 5 or 6 hours. So it's still kind of a time commitment. So big fan of beef ribs. It's one cut of barbecue that I've kind of turned my nose up on for a while has been turkey breast. But I guess I kind of had my mind changed. The first time I went to Franklin Barbecue, somebody said I had to get the turkey. And and the first time I went to Franklin, I actually waited in the line. And so you get there in the morning, you wait in line, you're there for hours. And so if you're going to wait 3 hours and tailgate and have beers waiting to get barbecue, you might as well go in there and buy everything. Like, one thing I don't understand is people that like go to these like really amazing barbecue joints and then they refuse to spend money to try everything. Like, seriously, go there and try a little bit of everything. You don't have to get like 6 sausage links. Get a sausage link. Get a few slices of brisket. Get a few slices of turkey. Get a few slices of everything. Because if you've gone to the trouble of driving somewhere to get barbecue that's not within your home range and waiting in line, just buy a smidge of everything so you can try it and know what you want to order for sure the next time. And so we ordered the turkey. And his turkey was like so buttery and so delicious that I kind of found some of his recipes that he has on turkey. And it's literally, you take a turkey breast, you rip the skin off. You don't want the skin or the bones. It's a boneless turkey breast. And then you put olive oil on it. And then the salt and pepper blend is a little more peppery. I think it's like 75% pepper, 25% salt. And you get a good coating on there and you let it smoke for a couple of hours. And then you eventually wrap it in foil with a stick of butter. And just that act of wrapping it in foil with a stick of butter, the steam helps keep the meat tender as it keeps to cook. And that stick of butter just permeates inside of that turkey breast. And then you get this like thick coat of black pepper on the outside. So you get this like really peppery, buttery turkey that is just amazing. So for sauces, like the vinegar sauce that I use, Walter, because he's asking if the sauce I use is homemade or commercial and what's my preferred commercial brand. If you want to trade recipes, Walter, shoot me an email. I don't tend to, I'm not saying I don't ever buy commercial sauce, but I don't usually use, commercial barbecue sauces. I'm the kind of guy, like the vinegar sauce I made is a recipe that I got from a friend. The rub that I use for pork is a recipe that I got from a different friend, actually the same friend. And then I don't typically, and if I'm going to make sauce, I actually can take that vinegar sauce that I have, that mopping sauce, and I can actually add a little ketchup and a little brown sugar and mix it all together and make a really good homemade sauce. And so I don't know that I have a favorite commercial brand. In general, with brisket and my ribs, I don't even use sauce or bother making sauce for those things. I want to taste the smoke and the seasoning on those. The only thing I really tend to make a sauce for is pulled pork, which but in pulled pork, it's fun because I feel like in Texas we have a lot of rules around barbecue and a lot of expectations around barbecue, especially in Central Texas. But with pulled pork, we don't have quite as many stipulations, and so I like to kind of take liberties with pulled pork and kind of make sauce. And then I'm a big fan of taking coleslaw and making pulled pork with some sauce, coleslaw, and then making a sandwich. I'm a big fan of that. So we've been going for a little over an hour and 15 minutes here. So let's see what other questions you guys have, and then we'll call it quits. Ooh, I know what we can talk about. I brought one of these. A question my buddy Dick Wallace always likes to ask is favorite swill beer, and we've asked that question. So if you're part of the Brew Club, we've asked that question to a few prominent people, and sometimes they'll give you like real answers, like they like Lone Star, which is what I'm going to say because I'm local and I'm from Texas. But some people will give you weird answers, like some Two Hearted ale, and you're like, I don't think anything that Two Hearted makes is what I would consider swill beer. Whereas Lone Star is like second tier macro lager, and so I'm a huge fan of Lone Star. I really enjoy Lone Star beer here locally. I'm a fan of Pearl beer as well. No mistakes about it. I do like my swill beer. I'm kind of one of those people that I'm either drinking really nice craft beer or homebrewed beer, or I'm drinking, I'm perfectly happy drinking Lone Star, PBR. My buddy Dick Wallace is from Rhode Island, so he brought me some Narragansett, and so it's got a pretty cool can where it talks about being the can featured in Jaws, because Narragansett's the one where in Jaws 1 Quinn crushes it against his forehead and then crumples it. So pretty cool beers, but I'm a big fan of swill beer. So if anybody has a favorite swill beer they want to give a shout out to here in Texas, Lone Star is probably the one I drink most of now. Back in college at I went to Texas A&M, and there was the Dixie Chicken. It's still a popular bar, but back in the day, and this was like the early 2000s, you would go in and you could get dollar Pearl. So you could go in and get a Pearl beer for $1 at the Dixie Chicken, which is pretty cheap for a beer for a college kid. So if you're feeling a little light on cash and you didn't have anybody to split a pitcher of Miller Lite with you, you could go over there and get dollar Pearl and drink those for a while that evening. So big fan of swill beers out there for all the people. In fact, a nice, delightful Lone Star right now. Cool. I think probably another swill beer that I've drank in quite a bit of is Natural Light. My friend turned 40, I believe it was this year, and we went to the Pensacola area for his. Okay, Kevin, I think Coors Light might be a little too highbrow for this conversation. That's all I'm going to say. Kevin Brand said Coors Light, and when I'm talking swill beer, I'm talking about the things below Miller and below. Miller Lite below the below deck on that. I'm thinking, Coors Banquet and Coors Light are pretty highbrow. In the Miller lineup, Miller High Life, I might qualify that as a good swill beer. It used to be a pretty prominent beer, and Kevin Brand just laughed at me. It used to be a pretty prominent beer, and then it kind of turned into their secondary line. But the Champagne of beers is still a great drink. I've drinking a lot of Natural Light. I think Natty Light. Again, we said my friend's 40th birthday party. We basically, we were going there, and he brews beer. I brew beer. Everybody there brewed beer. But we had a friend who who owned a brewery that was bringing beer to this party, and so we went to the store and. Somebody told me to buy beer, and so I bought Natural Light. And what's funny is that all the brewers, me, my buddy Steven, Curtis, everybody else, we were all drinking Natural Light over a whole bunch of other craft stuff that was in the fridge, because I think the more and more you get into this, the more and longer that you're into this, like having a beer that you don't have to think about every now and again is actually a feature. And I don't have to think about Lone Star very hard. I know what it is. I know what it tastes like. It tastes basically the same every time, and I don't have to think about it. It's kind of why I think we like Miller Lite too. Is it's got a nice flavor, and you don't have to think about it. So while I am with Jamie McDougal, who says I'll always drink local crafts now, just feel like the only low quality beer I'll drink is what I brew. Come on, Jamie, we can get it going up, man. But I drink a lot of local craft beer. I drink a lot of craft beer, but in the same token, it's nice to have something that I don't have to think about. And Walter Foster says in 2008, Shiner was the fancy beer. And I 100% agree with that. Whenever I had Shiner way back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, to me, Shiner Bock was the premium choice when I went to the bar, and it was kind of the fancier local craft option. I don't know that many people consider it craft now. Maybe on the fringe of craft, it's kind of big. But back in the day, I 100% agree. Shiner Bock was the thing that I thought was fancy. Then basically anything else you got, I guess, Rogue still had Dead Guy Ale I could get in some places, which I was never a big fan of Rogue's Dead Guy. There was some New Belgium stuff floating around, but overall, local Shiner was the option. So 100% agree. Cool. I'll give everybody just a couple more minutes to kind of throw stuff in there. Favorite swill beers will be shouted out to. But yeah, definitely Lone Star and Pearl. Narragansett's a good one. Pabst Blue Ribbon. I've won that Pabst Blue Ribbon a bunch of times. Lived the Miller High Life a time or three as well. Yeah, somebody said, living in Dry County south of Houston, I started homebrewing. That, to me, Walter, is a great reason, and I don't understand dry counties here in Texas, but whatever. And then Walter said, again, I had to go up to Houston to get Live Oak and St. Arnold. Yep. St. Arnold is another great brewery over there in Houston. Great product. I appreciate it. Far from swill beer, but Live Oak and St. Arnold are great breweries. And then, yep. Well, guys, I appreciate all the questions. Thanks for coming out. Thanks for supporting us. Thanks for supporting what we do here at Brewlosophy. It really does mean a lot to us. We do love doing this thing. We do love doing what we do, but it is, don't feel bad for us. It is quite a bit of work, and so your guys' support means a lot. It does help grease the wheels and make things go around. And I can assure you, we really do love and appreciate you guys supporting us on Patreon. So thanks for everybody that was able to come and show up. Hopefully people that catch this on the recording appreciated the stories and appreciated the time. If you guys have any questions, just feel free to email me. If you're part of the Brew Club, you can find me there. If you're on Discord, you can find me there as well. So thanks, guys. Appreciate you, and have a good one.
Huge thanks to Will Lovell and the many other wonderful people in the brewing world who have taken the time to sit down with patrons and field their questions. These sessions are always so much fun, and we'd love to have even more people involved. If you're interested at all, please head over to patreon.com/brewlosophy to view all of the rewards you can get for helping us out. And don't forget to subscribe to the Brew Lab, where host Kay Job takes you into the lab with brewing professionals to discuss the fascinating work they've done on our favorite beverage. And remember to head to brewlosophy.com to stay current on everything we are up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.